What was our surprise, mingled with horror, when we saw first an arm, then a leg, then a trunk, then a head appear, forming a human body, not in a state of nakedness, but clothed in dark garments. For a moment, I even thought that the limbs moved, that the hands were stretched towards us. The crew uttered a simultaneous cry. No, this body was not moving, but it was slowly slipping off the icy surface. I looked at Captain Len Guy. His face was as livid as that of the corpse that had drifted down from the far latitudes of the austral zone. What could be done was done to recover the body of the unfortunate man, and who can tell whether a faint breath of life did not animate it even then? In any case, his pockets might perhaps contain some document that would enable his identity to be established. Then, accompanied by a last prayer, those human remains should be committed to the depths of the ocean, the cemetery of sailors who die at sea. A boat was let down. I followed it with my eyes as it neared the side of the ice fragment eaten by the waves. Hurley eagerly set foot upon a spot which still offered some resistance. Gratian got out after him, while Francis kept the boat fast by the chain. The two crept along the ice until they reached the corpse, then drew it to them by the arms and legs and so got it into the boat. A few strokes of the oars and the boatswain had rejoined the schooner. The corpse, completely frozen, having been laid at the foot of the mizzen mast, Captain Len Guy approached and examined it long and closely, as though he sought to recognize it. It was the corpse of a sailor, dressed in coarse stuff, woolen trousers and a patched jersey. A belt encircled his waist twice. His death had evidently occurred some months previously, probably very soon after the unfortunate man had been carried away by the drift. He was about 40, with slightly grizzled hair, a mere skeleton covered with skin. He must have suffered agonies of hunger. Captain Len Guy lifted up the hair, which had been preserved by the cold, raised the head, gazed upon the scaled eyelids, and finally said with a sort of sob, "Patterson, Patterson." "Patterson," I exclaimed. The name, common as it was, touched some chord in my memory. When had I heard it uttered? Had I read it anywhere? At this moment, James West, on a hint from the boatswain, searched the pockets of the dead man and took out of them a knife, some string, an empty tobacco box, and lastly a leather pocketbook furnished with a metallic pencil. "Give me that," said the captain. Some of the leaves were covered with writing, almost entirely effaced by the damp. He found, however, some words on the last page which were still legible, and my emotion may be imagined when I heard him read aloud in a trembling voice. "The Jane, Sallel Island, by 83, there, 11 years, captain, 5 sailors surviving, hasten to bring them aid." And under these lines was a name, a signature, the name of Patterson. Then I remembered. Patterson was the second officer of the Jane, the mate of that schooner which had picked up Arthur Pym and Dirk Peters on the wreck of the Grampus, the Jane having reached Sallel Island, the Jane which was attacked by natives and blown up in the midst of those waters. So then it was all true. Edgar Poe's work was that of an historian, not a writer of romance. Arthur Gordon Pym's journal had actually been confided to him. Direct relations had been established between them. Arthur Pym existed, or rather he had existed, he was a real being, and he had died, by a sudden and deplorable death under circumstances not revealed before he had completed the narrative of his extraordinary voyage. And what parallel had he reached on leaving Sallel Island with his companion, Dirk Peters, and how had both of them been restored to their native land, America? I thought my head was turning, that I was going mad, I who accused Captain Guy of being insane. No, I had not heard aright, I had misunderstood. This was a mere phantom of my fancy. And yet, how was I to reject the evidence found on the body of the mate of the Jane, that Patterson whose words were supported by ascertained dates? And above all, how could I retain a doubt, after James West, who was the most self-possessed among us, had succeeded in deciphering the following fragments of sentences? "Drifting since the 3rd of June north of Sallel Island. Still there, Captain William Guy and 5 of the men of the Jane. The piece of ice I am on is drifting across the iceberg. Food will soon fail me. Since the 13th of June, my last resources exhausted. Today, 16th of June, I am going to die." So then, for nearly 3 months Patterson's body had lain on the surface of this ice waif, which we had met on our way from the Kerguelens to Tristan da Cunha. Ah, why had we not saved the mate of the Jane? I had to yield to evidence. Captain Len Guy, who knew Patterson, had recognized him in this frozen corpse. It was indeed he who accompanied the captain of the Jane when he had interred that bottle, containing the letter which I had refused to believe authentic, at the Kerguelens. Yes, for 11 years, the survivors of the English schooner had been cast away there without any hope of succor. Len Guy turned to me and said, "Do you believe now?" "I believe," said I falteringly, "but Captain William Guy of the Jane and Captain Len Guy of the Halbrane are brothers," he cried in a loud voice, which was heard by all the crew. Then we turned our eyes once more to the place where the lump of ice had been floating, but the double influence of the solar rays and the waters in this latitude had produced its effect. No trace of the dead man's last refuge remained on the surface of the sea. Chapter 7. Tristan da Cunha. 4 days later, the Halbrane neared that curious island of Tristan da Cunha, which may be described as the big boiler of the African seas. By that time, I had come to realize that the hallucination of Captain Len Guy was a truth, and that he and the captain of the Jane, also a reality, were connected with each other by this ocean waif from the authentic expedition of Arthur Pym. My last doubts were buried in the depths of the ocean with the body of Patterson. And now, what was Captain Len Guy going to do? There was not a shadow of doubt on that point. He would take the Halbrane to Sallel Island, as marked upon Patterson's notebook. His lieutenant, James West, would go whithersoever he was ordered to go. His crew would not hesitate to follow him, and would not be stopped by any fear of passing the limits assigned to human power, for the soul of their captain and the strength of their lieutenant would be in them. This, then, was the reason why Captain Len Guy refused to take passengers on board his ship, and why he had told me that his routes never were certain. He was always hoping that an opportunity for venturing into the sea of ice might arise. Who could tell, indeed, whether he would not have sailed for the south at once without putting in at Tristan da Cunha, if he had not wanted water? After what I had said before I went on board the Halbrane, I should have had no right to insist on his proceeding to the island for the sole purpose of putting me ashore. But a supply of water was indispensable, and besides, it might be possible there to put the schooner in a condition to contend with the icebergs and gain the open sea. Since open, it was beyond the 82nd parallel. In fact, to attempt what Lieutenant Wilkes of the American Navy was then attempting. The navigators knew at this period that from the middle of November to the beginning of March was the limit during which some success might be looked for. The temperature is more bearable then, storms are less frequent, the icebergs break loose from the mass, the ice wall has holes in it, and perpetual day reigns in that distant region. Tristan da Cunha lies to the south of the zone of the regular southwest winds. Its climate is mild and moist. The prevailing winds are west and northwest, and during the winter, August and September, south. The island was inhabited, by American whale fishers. After them, English soldiers were installed there to watch the St. Helena seas, and these remained until after the death of Napoleon, in 1821. Several years later, the group of islands populated by Americans and Dutchmen from the Cape acknowledged the suzerainty of Great Britain, but this was not so in 1839. My personal observation at that date convinced me that the possession of Tristan da Cunha was not worth disputing. In the 16th century, the islands were called the Land of Life. On the 5th of September in the morning, the towering volcano of the chief island was signaled, a huge snow-covered mass, whose crater formed the basin of a small lake. Next day, on our approach, we could distinguish a vast heaped-up lava field. At this distance, the surface of the water was striped with gigantic seaweeds, vegetable ropes, varying in length from 600 to 1,200 feet, and as thick as a wine barrel. Here I should mention that for 3 days subsequent to the finding of the fragment of ice, Captain Len Guy came on deck for strictly nautical purposes only, and I had no opportunities of seeing him except at meals, when he maintained silence, that not even James West could have enticed him to break. I made no attempt to do this, being convinced that the hour would come when Len Guy would again speak to me of his brother, and of the efforts which he intended to make to save him and his companions. Now, I repeat, the season being considered, that hour had not come, when the schooner cast anchor on the 6th of September at Ansedling, in Falmouth Bay, precisely in the place indicated in Arthur Pym's narrative as the moorings of the Jane. At the period of the arrival of the Jane, an ex-corporal of the English artillery named Glass reigned over a little colony of 26 individuals, who traded with the Cape, and whose only vessel was a small schooner. At our arrival, this glass had more than 50 subjects, and was, as Arthur Pym remarked, quite independent of the British government. Relations with the ex-corporal were established on the arrival of the Halbrane, and he proved very friendly and obliging. West, to whom the captain left the business of refilling the water tanks and taking in supplies of fresh meat and vegetables, had every reason to be satisfied with Glass, who, no doubt, expected to be paid, and was paid handsomely. The day after our arrival, I met ex-corporal Glass, a vigorous, well-preserved man, whose 60 years had not impaired his intelligent vivacity. Independently of his trade with the Cape and the Falklands, he did an important business in seal skins and the oil of marine animals, and his affairs were prosperous. As he appeared very willing to talk, I entered briskly into conversation with this self-appointed governor of a contented little colony, by asking him, "Do many ships put into Tristan da Cunha?" "As many as we require," he replied, rubbing his hands together behind his back, according to his invariable custom. "In the fine season?" "Yes, in the fine season, if indeed we can be said to have any other in these latitudes." "I congratulate you, Mr. Glass, but it is to be regretted that Tristan da Cunha has not a single port, if you possessed a landing stage now." "For what purpose, sir, when nature has provided us with such a bay as this, where there is shelter from gales, and it is easy to lie snug right up against the rocks? No, Tristan has no port, and Tristan can do without one." Why should I have contradicted this good man? He was proud of his island, just as the Prince of Monaco is justly proud of his tiny principality. I did not persist, and we talked of various things. He offered to arrange for me an excursion to the depths of the thick forests, which clothed the volcano up to the middle of the central cove. I thanked him, but declined his offer, preferring to employ my leisure on land in some mineralogical studies. Besides, the Halbrane was to set sail so soon as she had taken in her provisions. "Your captain is in a remarkable hurry," said Governor Glass. "You think so?" "He is in such haste that his lieutenant does not even talk of buying skins or oil from me." "We require only fresh victuals and fresh water, Mr. Glass." "Very well," replied the governor, who was rather annoyed. "What the Halbrane will not take other vessels will." Then he resumed, "And where is your schooner bound for on leaving us?" "For the Falklands, no doubt, where she can be repaired." "You, sir, are only a passenger, I suppose." "As you say, Mr. Glass, and I had even intended to remain at Tristan da Cunha for some weeks, but I have had to relinquish that project." "I am sorry to hear it, sir. We should have been happy to offer you hospitality while awaiting the arrival of another ship." "Such hospitality would have been most valuable to me," I replied, "but unfortunately I cannot avail myself of it." In fact, I had finally resolved not to quit the schooner, but to embark for America from the Falkland Isles without much delay. I felt sure that Captain Len Guy would not refuse to take me to the islands. I informed Mr. Glass of my intention, and he remarked, still in a tone of annoyance, "As for your captain, I have not even seen the color of his hair. I don't think he has any intention of coming ashore." "Is he ill?" "Not to my knowledge, but it does not concern you, since he has sent his lieutenant to represent him." "Oh, he's a cheerful person. One may extract 2 words from him occasionally. Fortunately, it is easier to get coin out of his pocket than speech out of his lips." "That's the important thing, Mr. Glass." "You are right, sir. Mr. Georling of Connecticut, I believe." I assented. "So, I know your name, while I have yet to learn that of the captain of the Halbrane." "His name is Len Guy." "An Englishman?" "Yes, an Englishman." "He might have taken the trouble to pay a visit to a countryman of his, Mr. Georling, but stay, I had some dealings formerly with a captain of that name. Guy. "William Guy?" I asked quickly. "Precisely, William Guy." "Who commanded the Jane?" "The Jane, yes, the same man." "An English schooner which put in at Tristan da Cunha 11 years ago." 11 years, Mr. Georling. I had been settled in the island where Captain Geoffrey of the Barrack of London found me in the year 1824 for full 7 years. I perfectly recall this William Guy as if he were before me. He was a fine, open-hearted fellow, and I sold him a cargo of seal skins. He had the air of a gentleman, rather proud but good-natured. And the Jane. I can see her now at her moorings in the same place as the Halbrane. She was a handsome vessel of 180 tons, very slender forwards. She belonged to the port of Liverpool. Yes, that is true, all that is true. And is the Jane still afloat, Mr. Jeorling? No, Mr. Glass. Was she lost? The fact is only too true, and the greater part of her crew with her. Will you tell me how this happened? Willingly. On leaving Tristan da Cunha, the Jane headed for the bearings of the Aurora and other islands, which William Guy hoped to recognize from information. That came from me, interrupted the ex-corporal. And those other islands, may I learn whether the Jane discovered them? No, nor the Auroras either, although William Guy remained several weeks in those waters, running from east to west, with a lookout always at the masthead. He must have lost his bearings, Mr. Jeorling, for if several whalers who were well deserving of credit are to be believed, these islands do exist, and it was even proposed to give them my name. That would have been but just, I replied politely. It will be very vexatious if they are not discovered some day, added the governor, in a tone which indicated that he was not devoid of vanity. It was then, I resumed, that Captain Guy resolved to carry out a project he had long cherished, and in which he was encouraged by a certain passenger who was on board the Jane. Arthur Gordon Pym, exclaimed Glass, and his companion, one Dirk Peters. The two had been picked up at sea by the schooner. You knew them, Mr. Glass? I asked eagerly. Knew them, Mr. Jeorling? I should think I did, indeed. That Arthur Pym was a strange person, always wanting to rush into adventures, a real rash American, quite capable of starting off to the moon. Has he gone there at last? No, not quite, Mr. Glass, but during her voyage, the schooner, it seems, did clear the polar circle and pass the ice wall. She got farther than any ship had ever done before. What a wonderful feat! Yes, unfortunately, the Jane did not return. Arthur Pym and William Guy escaped the doom of the Jane and the most of her crew. They even got back to America, how I do not know. Afterwards Arthur Pym died, but under what circumstances I am ignorant. As for the half-breed, after having retired to Illinois, he went off one day without a word to anyone, and no trace of him has been found. And William Guy? Asked Mr. Glass. I related the finding of the body of Patterson, the mate of the Jane, and I added that everything led to the belief that the captain of the Jane and 5 of his companions were still living on an island in the austral regions, at less than 6 degrees from the pole. Ah, Mr. Jeorling, cried Glass, if some day William Guy and his sailors might be saved, they seem to me to be such fine fellows. That is just what the Halbrane is certainly going to attempt, so soon as she is ready, for her captain Len Guy is William Guy's own brother. Is it possible? Well, although I do not know Captain Len Guy, I venture to assert that the brothers do not resemble each other, at least in their behavior to the governor of Tristan da Cunha. It was plain that the governor was profoundly mortified, but no doubt he consoled himself by the prospect of selling his goods at 25% above their value. One thing was certain, Captain Len Guy had no intention of coming ashore. This was the more singular, inasmuch as he could not be unaware that the Jane had put in at Tristan da Cunha before proceeding to the southern seas. Surely, he might be expected to put himself in communication with the last European who had shaken hands with his brother. Nevertheless, Captain Len Guy remained persistently on board his ship, without even going on deck, and looking through the glass skylight of his cabin, I saw him perpetually stooping over the table, which was covered with open books and outspread charts. No doubt the charts were those of the austral latitudes, and the books were narratives of the precursors of the Jane in those mysterious regions of the south. On the table lay also a volume which had been read and reread 100 times. Most of its pages were dog's-eared, and their margins were filled with penciled notes, and on the cover shone the title in brightly gilded letters. The Adventures of Arthur Gordon Pym. Chapter 8. Bound for the Falklands. On the 8th of September, in the evening, I had taken leave of His Excellency the Governor-General of the Archipelago of Tristan da Cunha, for such is the official title bestowed upon himself by that excellent fellow, Glass, ex-corporal of artillery in the British Army. On the following day, before dawn, the Halbrane sailed. After we had rounded Herald Point, the few houses of Ansidlung disappeared behind the extremity of Falmouth Bay. A fine breeze from the east carried us along gaily. During the morning, we left behind us in succession Elephant Bay, Hardy Rock, West Point, Cotton Bay, and Dolly's Promontory. But it took the entire day to lose sight of the volcano of Tristan da Cunha, which is 8,000 feet high. Its snow-clad bulk was at last veiled by the shades of evening. During that week, our voyage proceeded under the most favorable conditions. If these were maintained, the end of the month of September ought to bring us within sight of the first peaks of the Falkland Group. And so, very sensibly towards the south, the schooner having descended from the 38th parallel to the 55th degree of latitude. The most daring, or perhaps I ought to say, the most lucky of those discoverers who had preceded the Halbrane, under the command of Captain Len Guy in the Antarctic seas, had not gone beyond Kemp, the 66th parallel, Ballery, the 67th, Biscoe, the 68th, Bellinghausen and Morrell, the 70th, Cook, the 71st, Weddell, the 74th. And it was beyond the 83rd, nearly 550 miles farther, that we must go to the succor of the survivors of the Jane. I confess that for a practical man of unimaginative temperament, I felt strangely excited. A nervous restlessness had taken possession of me. I was haunted by the figures of Arthur Pym and his companions, lost in Antarctic ice deserts. I began to feel a desire to take part in the proposed undertaking of Captain Len Guy. I thought about it incessantly. As a fact, there was nothing to recall me to America. It is true that whether I should get the consent of the commander of the Halbrane remained to be seen. But after all, why should he refuse to keep me as a passenger? Would it not be a very human satisfaction to him to give me material proof that he was in the right, by taking me to the very scene of a catastrophe that I had regarded as fictitious, showing me the remains of the Jane at Sallel, and landing me on that self-same island which I had declared to be a myth? Nevertheless, I resolved to wait, before I came to any definite determination, until an opportunity of speaking to the captain should arise. Cook's route was effectually barred by ice floes. After an interval of unfavorable weather, during which the Halbrane made but slow progress, on the 4th of October in the morning, the aspect of the sky and the sea underwent a marked change. The wind became calm, the waves abated, and the next day the breeze veered to the northwest. This was very favorable to us, and in 10 days, with a continuance of such fortunate conditions, we might hope to reach the Falklands. It was on the 11th that the opportunity of an explanation with Captain Len Guy was presented to me, and by himself, for he came out of his cabin, advanced to the side of the ship where I was seated, and took his place at my side. Evidently he wished to talk to me, and of what, if not the subject which entirely absorbed him? He began by saying, "I have not yet had the pleasure of a chat with you, Mr. Jeorling, since our departure from Tristan da Cunha." "To my regret, Captain," I replied, but with reserve, for I wanted him to make the running. "I beg you to excuse me," he resumed. "I have so many things to occupy me and make me anxious. A plan of campaign to organize, in which nothing must be unforeseen or unprovided for. I beg you not to be displeased with me." "I am not, I assure you." "That is all right, Mr. Jeorling. And now that I know you, that I am able to appreciate you, I congratulate myself upon having you for a passenger until our arrival at the Falklands. I am very grateful, Captain, for what you have done for me, and I feel encouraged too." The moment seemed propitious to my making my proposal, when Captain Len Guy interrupted me. "Well, Mr. Jeorling," he asked, "are you now convinced of the reality of the voyage of the Jane, or do you still regard Edgar Poe's book as a work of pure imagination?" "I do not so regard it, Captain. You no longer doubt that Arthur Pym and Dirk Peters have really existed, or that my brother William Guy and 5 of his companions are living. I should be the most incredulous of men, Captain, to doubt either fact, and my earnest desire is that the favor of heaven may attend you and secure the safety of the shipwrecked mariners of the Jane. I will do all in my power, Mr. Jeorling, and by the blessing of God I shall succeed." "I hope so, Captain. Indeed, I am certain it will be so, and if you consent." Is it not the case that you talked of this matter with one Glass, an English ex-corporal, who sets up to be governor of Tristan da Cunha? Inquired the captain, without allowing me to finish my sentence. That is so, I replied, and what I learned from Glass has contributed not a little to change my doubts into certainty. Ah, he has satisfied you. Yes, he perfectly remembers to have seen the Jane, 11 years ago, when she had put in at Tristan da Cunha. The Jane and my brother. He told me that he had personal dealings with Captain William Guy. And he traded with the Jane. Yes, as he has just been trading with the Halbrane. She was moored in this bay. In the same place as your schooner. And Arthur Pym Dirk Peters. He was with them frequently. Did he ask what had become of them? Oh yes, and I informed him of the death of Arthur Pym, whom he regarded as a foolhardy adventurer, capable of any daring folly. Say a madman, and a dangerous madman, Mr. Georling. Was it not he who led my unfortunate brother into that fatal enterprise? There is, indeed, reason to believe so from his narrative. And never to forget it, added the captain in a tone of agitation. This man Glass, I resumed, also knew Patterson, the mate of the Jane. He was a fine, brave, faithful fellow, Mr. Georling, and devoted, body and soul, to my brother. As West is to you, Captain. Does Glass know where the shipwrecked men from the Jane are now? I told him, Captain, and also all that you have resolved to do to save them. I did not think proper to add that Glass had been much surprised at Captain Guy's abstaining from visiting him, as, in his absurd vanity, he held the commander of the Halbrane bound to do, nor that he did not consider the governor of Tristan da Cunha bound to take the initiative. I wish to ask you, Mr. Georling, whether you think everything in Arthur Pym's journal, which has been published by Edgar Poe, is exactly true. I think there is some need for doubt, I answered, the singular character of the hero of those adventures being taken into consideration, at least concerning the phenomena of the island of Tsalal. And we know that Arthur Pym was mistaken in asserting that Captain William Guy and several of his companions perished in the landslip of the hill at Clock Clock. Ah, but he does not assert this, Mr. Georling. He says only that, when he and Dirk Peters had reached the opening through which they could discern the surrounding country, the seat of the artificial earthquake was revealed to them. Now, as the whole face of the hill was rushing into the ravine, the fate of my brother and 29 of his men could not be doubtful to his mind. He was, most naturally, led to believe that Dirk Peters and himself were the only white men remaining alive on the island. He said nothing but this, nothing more. These were only suppositions, very reasonable, are they not? I admit that fully, Captain. But now, thanks to Patterson's notebook, we are certain that my brother and 5 of his companions escaped from the landslip contrived by the natives. That is quite clear, Captain. But as to what became of the survivors of the Jane, whether they were taken by the natives of Tsalal and kept in captivity, or remained free, Patterson's notebook says nothing, nor does it relate under what circumstances he himself was carried far away from them. All that we shall learn, Mr. Georling. Yes, we shall know all. The main point is that we are quite sure my brother and 5 of his sailors were living less than 4 months ago on some part of Tsalal Island. There is now no question of a romance signed Edgar Poe, but of a veracious narrative signed Patterson. Captain, said I, will you let me be one of your company until the end of the campaign of the Halbrane in the Antarctic seas? Captain Len Guy looked at me with a glance as penetrating as a keen blade. Otherwise, he did not appear surprised by the proposal I had made. Perhaps he had been expecting it, and he uttered only the single word. Willingly. Chapter 9. Fitting out the Halbrane. On the 15th of October, our schooner cast anchor in Port Egmont, on the north of West Falkland. The group is composed of 2 islands, one the above named, the other Soledad or East Falkland. Captain Len Guy gave 12 hours leave to the whole crew. The next day the proceedings were to begin, by a careful and minute inspection of the vessel's hull and keel, in view of the contemplated prolonged navigation of the Antarctic seas. That day Captain Len Guy went ashore, to confer with the governor of the group on the subject of the immediate revictualling of the schooner. He did not intend to make expense a consideration, because the whole adventure might be wrecked by an unwise economy, Besides, I was ready to aid with my purse, as I told him, and I intended that we should be partners in the cost of this expedition. James West remained on board all day, according to his custom in the absence of the captain, and was engaged until evening in the inspection of the hold. I did not wish to go ashore until the next day. I should have ample time while we remained in port to explore Port Egmont and its surroundings, and to study the geology and mineralogy of the island. Hurleygerly regarded the opportunity as highly favorable for the renewal of talk with me, and availed himself of it accordingly. He accosted me as follows. "Accept my sincere compliments, Mr. Jeorling." "And wherefore, boatswain?" "On account of what I have just heard, that you are to come with us to the far end of the Antarctic seas." "Oh, not so far, I imagine, and if it is not a matter of going beyond the 84th parallel." "Who can tell?" replied the boatswain. "At all events the Halbrane will make more degrees of latitude than any other ship before her." "We shall see." "And does that not alarm you, Mr. Jeorling?" "Not in the very least." "Nor us, rest assured." "No, no, you see, Mr. Jeorling, our captain is a good one, although he is no talker. You only need to take him the right way. First he gives you the passage to Tristan da Cunha that he refused you at first, and now he extends it to the pole." "The pole is not the question, boatswain." "Ah, it will be reached at last some day." "The thing has not yet been done. And besides, I don't take much interest in the pole and have no ambition to conquer it. In any case it is only to Tsalal Island." "Tsalal Island, of course. Nevertheless, you will acknowledge that our captain has been very accommodating to you, and therefore I am much obliged to him, boatswain, and, I hasten to add, to you also, since it is to your influence I owe my passage." "Very likely." Hurleygerly, a good fellow at bottom, as I afterwards learned, discerned a little touch of irony in my tone, but he did not appear to do so. He was resolved to persevere in his patronage of me, and indeed, his conversation could not be otherwise than profitable to me, for he was thoroughly acquainted with the Falkland Islands. The result was that on the following day, I went ashore adequately prepared to begin my perquisitions. At that period, the Falklands were not utilized as they have been since. It was at a later date that Port Stanley, described by Elisée Reclus, the French geographer, as ideal, was discovered. Port Stanley is sheltered at every point of the compass and could contain all the fleets of Great Britain. If I had been sailing for the last 2 months with bandaged eyes, and without knowing whither the Halbrane was bound, and had been asked during the first few hours at our moorings, "Are you in the Falkland Isles or in Norway?" I should have puzzled how to answer the question, for here were coasts forming deep creeks, the steep hills with peaked sides, and the coast ledges faced with grey rock. Even the seaside climate, exempt from great extremes of cold and heat, is common to the two countries. Besides, the frequent rains of Scandinavia visit Magellan's region in like abundance. Both have dense fogs, and in spring and autumn, winds so fierce that the very vegetables in the fields are frequently rooted up. A few walks inland would, however, have sufficed to make me recognize that I was still separated by the equator from the waters of northern Europe. What had I found to observe in the neighborhood of Port Egmont after my explorations of the first few days? Nothing but the signs of a sickly vegetation, nowhere arborescent. Here and there a few shrubs grew, in place of the flourishing firs of the Norwegian mountains, and the surface of a spongy soil which sinks and rises under the foot is carpeted with mosses, fungi, and lichens. No, this was not the enticing country where the echoes of the sagas resound. This was not the poetic realm of Woden and the Valkyries. On the deep waters of the Falkland Strait, which separates the two principal isles, great masses of extraordinary aquatic vegetation floated, and the bays of the archipelago, where whales were already becoming scarce, were frequented by other marine mammals. Of enormous size, seals, 25 feet long by 20 in circumference, and great numbers of sea elephants, wolves, and lions, of proportions no less gigantic. The uproar made by these animals, by the females and their young especially, surpasses description. One would think that herds of cattle were bellowing on the beach. Neither difficulty nor danger attends the capture, or at least the slaughter of the marine beasts. The sealers kill them with a blow of a club when they are lying in the sands on the strand. These are the special features that differentiate Scandinavia from the Falklands. Not to speak of the infinite number of birds which rose on my approach, grebe, cormorants, black-headed swans, and above all, tribes of penguins, of which hundreds of thousands are massacred every year. One day, when the air was filled with a sound of braying, sufficient to deafen one, I asked an old sailor belonging to Port Egmont, "Are there asses about here?" "Sir," he replied, "those are not asses that you hear but penguins." The asses themselves, had any been there, would have been deceived by the braying of these stupid birds. I pursued my investigations some way to the west of the bay. West Falkland is more extensive than its neighbor, La Soledad, and possesses another fort at the southern point of Byron's Sound, too far off for me to go there. I could not estimate the population of the archipelago even approximately. Probably it did not then exceed from 200 to 300 souls, mostly English, with some Indians, Portuguese, Spaniards, gauchos from the Argentine Pampas, and natives from Tierra del Fuego. On the other hand, the representatives of the ovine and bovine races were to be counted by tens of thousands. More than 500,000 sheep yield over $400,000 worth of wool yearly. There are also horned cattle bred on the islands. These seem to have increased in size, while the other quadrupeds, for instance, horses, pigs, and rabbits, have decreased. All these live in a wild state, and the only beast of prey is the dog-fox, a species peculiar to the fauna of the Falklands. Not without reason has this island been called a cattle farm. What inexhaustible pastures, what an abundance of that savory grass, the tussock, does nature lavish on animals there. Australia, though so rich in this respect, does not set a better spread table before her ovine and bovine pensioners. The Falklands ought to be resorted to for the revictualling of ships. The groups are of real importance to navigators making for the Strait of Magellan, as well as to those who come to fish in the vicinity of the polar regions. When the work on the hull was done, West occupied himself with the masts and the rigging, with the assistance of Martin Holt, our sailing master, who was very clever at this kind of industry. On the 21st of October, Captain Len Guy said to me, "You shall see, Mr. Jeorling, that nothing will be neglected to ensure the success of our enterprise. Everything that can be foreseen has been foreseen, and if the Halbrane is to perish in some catastrophe, it will be because it is not permitted to human beings to go against the designs of God. I have good hopes, Captain, as I have already said. Your vessel and her crew are worthy of confidence, but supposing the expedition should be much prolonged, perhaps the supply of provisions. We shall carry sufficient for 2 years, and those shall be of good quality. Port Egmont has proved capable of supplying us with everything we require." Another question, if you will allow me. "Put it, Mr. Jeorling, put it. Shall you not need a more numerous crew for the Halbrane, though you have men enough for the working of the ship? Suppose you find you have to attack or to defend in the Antarctic waters. Let us not forget that, according to Arthur Pym's narrative, there were thousands of natives on Sallel Island, and if his companions are prisoners. I hope, Mr. Jeorling, our artillery will protect the Halbrane better than the Jane was protected by her guns. To tell the truth, the crew we have would not be sufficient for an expedition of this kind. I have been arranging for recruiting our forces." "Will it be difficult?" "Yes and no, for the governor has promised to help me. I surmise, Captain, that recruits will have to be attracted by larger pay." "Double pay, Mr. Jeorling, and the whole crew must have the same. You know, Captain, I am disposed, and indeed, desirous to contribute to the expenses of the expedition. Will you kindly consider me as your partner?" "All that shall be arranged, Mr. Jeorling, and I am very grateful to you. The main point is to complete our armament with the least possible delay. We must be ready to clear out in a week." The news that the schooner was bound for the Antarctic seas had produced some sensation in the Falklands, at Port Egmont, and in the ports of La Soledad. At that season, a number of unoccupied sailors were there, awaiting the passing of the whaling ships to offer their services, for which they were very well paid in general. If it had been only for a fishing campaign on the borders of the polar circle, between the Sandwich Islands and New Georgia, Captain Len Guy would have merely had to make a selection. But the projected voyage was a very different thing, and only the old sailors of the Halbrane were entirely indifferent to the dangers of such an enterprise, and ready to follow their chief whithersoever it might please him to go. In reality, it was necessary to treble the crew of the schooner. Counting the captain, the mate, the boatswain, the cook, and myself, we were 13 on board. Now, 32 or 34 men would not be too many for us, and it must be remembered that there were 38 on board the Jane. In this emergency, the governor exerted himself to the utmost, and thanks to the largely extra pay that was offered, Captain Len Guy procured his full tale of seamen. 9 recruits signed articles for the duration of the campaign, which could not be fixed beforehand, but was not to extend beyond Sallel Island. The crew, counting every man on board except myself, numbered 31, and a 32nd for whom I bespeak especial attention. On the eve of our departure, Captain Len Guy was accosted at the angle of the port by an individual whom he recognized as a sailor by his clothes, his walk, and his speech. This individual said, in a rough and hardly intelligible voice, "Captain, I have to make a proposal to you." "What is it?" "Have you still a place?" "For a sailor." "For a sailor." "Yes and no." "Is it yes?" "It is yes, if the man suits me." "Will you take me?" "You are a seaman." "I have served the sea for 25 years." "Where?" "In the southern seas." "Far?" "Yes, far, far." "Your age?" 44 years. "And you are at Port Egmont?" "I shall have been there 3 years, come Christmas." "Did you expect to get on a passing whale ship?" "No." "Then what were you doing here?" "Nothing, and I did not think of going to sea again." "Then why seek a berth?" "Just an idea. The news of the expedition your schooner is going on was spread. I desire to take part in it, with your leave, of course." "You are known at Port Egmont?" "Well known, and I have incurred no reproach since I came here." "Very well," said the captain. "I will make inquiry respecting you." "Inquire, captain, and if you say yes, my bag shall be on board this evening." "What is your name?" "Hunt." "And you are?" "An American." This Hunt was a man of short stature. His weather-beaten face was brick red, his skin of a yellowish-brown like an Indian's, his body clumsy, his head very large, his legs were bowed. His whole frame denoted exceptional strength, especially the arms, which terminated in huge hands. His grizzled hair resembled a kind of fur. A particular and anything but prepossessing character was imparted to the physiognomy of this individual by the extraordinary keenness of his small eyes, his almost lipless mouth, which stretched from ear to ear, and his long teeth, which were dazzlingly white, their enamel being intact, for he had never been attacked by scurvy, the common scourge of seamen in high latitudes. Hunt had been living in the Falklands for 3 years. He lived alone on a pension. No one knew from whence this was derived. He was singularly uncommunicative, and passed his time in fishing, by which he might have lived, not only as a matter of sustenance, but as an article of commerce. The information gained by Captain Len Guy was necessarily incomplete, as it was confined to Hunt's conduct during his residence at Port Egmont. The man did not fight, he did not drink, and he had given many proofs of his Herculean strength. Concerning his past nothing was known, but undoubtedly he had been a sailor. He had said more to Len Guy than he had ever said to anybody, but he kept silence respecting the family to which he belonged and the place of his birth. This was of no importance. That he should prove to be a good sailor was all we had to think about. Hunt obtained a favorable reply and came on board that same evening. On the 27th, in the morning, in the presence of the authorities of the archipelago, the Halbrane's anchor was lifted, the last good wishes and the final adieus were exchanged, and the schooner took the sea. The same evening Capes Dolphin and Pembroke disappeared in the mists of the horizon. Thus began the astonishing adventure undertaken by these brave men, who were driven by a sentiment of humanity towards the most terrible regions of the Antarctic realm. Chapter 10. The outset of the enterprise. Here was I then, launched into an adventure which seemed likely to surpass all my former experiences. Who would have believed such a thing of me? But I was under a spell which drew me towards the unknown, that unknown of the polar world whose secrets so many daring pioneers had in vain essayed to penetrate. And this time, who could tell but that the Sphinx of the Antarctic regions would speak for the first time to human ears? The new crew had firstly to apply themselves to learning their several duties, and the old, all fine fellows aided them in the task. Although Captain Len Guy had not had much choice, he seemed to have been in luck. These sailors, of various nationalities, displayed zeal and goodwill. They were aware, also, that the mate was a man whom it would not do to vex, for Hurliguerly had given them to understand that West would break any man's head who did not go straight. His chief allowed him full latitude in this respect. A latitude, he added, which is obtained by taking the altitude of the eye with a shut fist. I recognized my friend the boatswain in the manner of this warning, to all whom it might concern. The new hands took the admonition seriously, and there was no occasion to punish any of them. As for Hunt, while he observed the docility of a true sailor in all his duties, he always kept himself apart, speaking to none, and even slept on the deck, in a corner, rather than occupy a bunk in the forecastle with the others. Captain Len Guy's intention was to take the Sandwich Isles for his point of departure towards the south, after having made acquaintance with New Georgia, distant 800 miles from the Falklands. Thus the schooner would be in longitude on the route of the Jane. On the 2nd of November, this course brought us to the bearings, which certain navigators have assigned to the Aurora Islands, 30 degrees 15' 2b9 of latitude, and degrees 33' 2b9 of east longitude. Well then, notwithstanding the affirmations, which I regarded with suspicion, of the captains of the Aurora in 1762, of the St. Miguel in 1769, of the Peril in 1779, of the Prinicus and the Dolors in 1790, of the Atrevida in 1794, which gave the bearings of the 3 islands of the group, we did not perceive a single indication of land in the whole of the space traversed by us. It was the same with regard to the alleged islands of the conceded glass. Not a single little islet was to be seen in the position he had indicated, although the lookout was most carefully kept. It is to be feared that His Excellency the Governor of Tristan da Cunha will never see his name figuring in geographical nomenclature. Taking in sail under difficulties. Taking in sail under difficulties.